So the reason I chose this topic of socialism is because finally, almost at the end of Trump's first term, the clouds begin to part, and we have a big issue coming to the center: socialism. And it's an issue that, well, first of all, I've had a little experience with it myself, because I grew up in socialist India. India was a socialist country. And during that whole time that India was a socialist country, and for me, it's a vague set of memories. I mean, we had to stand in line to get a ration card, because you had to ration the amount of sugar you could buy, or rice, or cooking oil. And the corruption that kind of seeps into every aspect of India, always paying somebody under. These are my childhood memories. This was Indian socialism. And in fact, when I came to America, kind of fleeing Indian socialism, you might say, the basic image of India in America was India was the begging bowl of the world. And some of you remember, your parents probably told you when you were younger, listen, Johnny, you better eat your food because there are millions of starving people in India. Now, interestingly, you probably don't say that to your kids. In fact, what you probably say to your kids is something more like this: Johnny, you better study really hard because there are millions of Indians waiting to take your job. So, India has had a kind of an evolution away from socialism. My wife, Debbie, who's here in the audience, is from Venezuela. Hey, Debbie, you want to say hi? So Venezuela, and I'll come back to this, has gone in the opposite direction. A once prosperous country, ultimately thick with resources, a tremendous amount of uranium and gold and minerals, once the richest country in South America with the 4th highest per capita income in the world, a country that is actually dripping with oil, in which there are now gasoline lines, shortages. And so what you've seen is the way in which socialism kills. I mean, kills the country, destroys a state, makes it ultimately into. And this is the experience of the 20th century. It's really odd to me that we're even talking about socialism, because socialism appeared to have been decisively refuted, discredited, to use Reagan's terms, tossed on the ash heap of history. We thought it was done. In fact, I would say, if one takes a little bit of a longer view, that socialism is the most discredited idea in the world after slavery. Slavery is probably number one, and socialism is number two. And if you look at the deepest works on socialism, they're presented in Hayek, for example, The Road to Serfdom, kind of a telling title of Solzhenitsyn's work. Socialism is presented as a form of slavery. Now, interestingly, today, well, I guess we do have certain forms of slavery in the world. We have sex slavery. We have certain forms of forced captivity. But there's, as far as I know, no party in the world that is the pro-slavery party. We don't have a major party, certainly not in the United States, that says, you know, the thing about slavery, guys, is it was a really good idea. The implementation was always poor. But we have an idea for how to get it right this time. This time, we're going to do slavery right. Nobody says that. You can't say that. You would be immediately carried out in a straitjacket. But with socialism, people do say that. They say, we know that 50 years ago, 60% of the real estate on the planet was controlled by regimes calling themselves socialist. This is not just the entire Soviet bloc encompassing Eastern Europe, Romania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. This is not most of South America was socialist. Almost all of Africa went socialist in the aftermath of colonialism. Half of Asia, including, of course, China and India, the two largest countries, socialist. So really, more than half the human beings on the planet were living under a regime, in a sense, named after Karl Marx. Unbelievable. No man, except perhaps Jesus Christ, has had that kind of influence in history. And then this whole thing imploded. Boom. The Soviet Union collapsed, the Communist Party abolished itself, Eastern Europe disintegrated, the Berlin Wall came down. All the countries that were socialist began to run away from socialism, leaving only a few isolated outposts, North Korea, Cuba, now Venezuela. And that's pretty much it. That's all that's left, really. So socialism was vanquished, and it was vanquished by history, and it was vanquished by experience. Very rarely in the world can you actually compare two different systems to see which one works better. If I were to compare, say, what was happening in France with, let's just say, the Ming Dynasty in China, different people, different culture, it's really hard to compare. But with socialism, we actually have really good comparisons. We have North and South Korea. North Korea, socialist. South Korea, capitalist. Look at the result. South Korea is 50 times richer than North Korea. People in South Korea live for 10 years longer. So in every measure of human welfare, you can see capitalism's doing better. You look at East and West Germany, the same thing. Same people, same background, same language, same culture, just two rival economic systems. So there you are. History rarely gives us this kind of test case. So you would think that the argument was settled. But now in the 21st century, certainly if the collapse of socialism was the big story of the last century, you would have to say the revival of socialism, not just in some remote outpost, but here in America, represents one of the biggest stories of the 21st century. And the first question you have to ask is how is this even possible? How is this even possible? And how is it possible that, well, the actual socialist gang is kind of a small and amusing crew. You have AOC. Now, AOC is, well, I gotta say, AOC, you know, I don't underestimate AOC because she has kind of a vivid way of putting things. And she also has that permanently startled look in her eyes, which is really interesting to watch. It's almost as if a light goes on, and then she speaks. And what comes out of her mouth is amazing. I mean, it's stuff that is, Miami will not be here in 5 years, right? Things like that. Now, obviously, no one believes it, because think about it. If Miami is not going to be here in 5 years, and if there was really data behind that, or let's say if Miami was not going to be here in 20 years, and there was data behind that, everybody would have access to that data, and suddenly you'd notice that the price of coastal properties in Miami would start falling. Not even if this was a certainty. If there was a 50% chance that this could occur, you would start seeing a drop in real estate values in Miami. And sellers would panic, and buyers would jump for their opportunity, and real estate agents would know it. But the truth of it is, nothing is happening in Miami. And what that means is that sellers know it's bogus, and buyers know it's bogus, and real estate agents know it's bogus. Everybody knows it's bogus. The Obamas know it's bogus because they just spent $15 million to buy coastal property in Martha's Vineyard. They know it's bogus. That's AOC. Then you have Ilhan Omar, to my mind, a more intriguing character. In fact, a little bit more of a global figure. AOC is not really a global figure. AOC is basically a bartender. But Ilhan Omar inspires people all over the world. She inspires Muslims all over the world. Why? First of all, she's a woman from the desert. She's poor. She's a person of color. She's a woman. In other words, when you think of all the different claims of intersectionality, she's got the gender card, she's got the race card, she's got the desert card. She pretty much has it all. I mean, she'd completely finish the job if she was missing a leg, because then she'd also have the handicap card. So she's sort of, I'd give it 3 out of 4, but 3 out of 4 is pretty impressive. I mean, I only have the person of color card. I'm 1 out of 4.